Hi everyone. Today I wanted to examine two different scenes from Star Wars to exemplify a larger argument. The scenes in question are the fight scene between Obi-Wan Kenobi and Darth Vader from Obi-Wan Kenobi and Marva's speech and the riot from the finale in Andor. I don't have access to the entire scene from Andor, and furthermore, I'm only watching the action components from both scenes because I want to present how different in style they are. One is very operatic, it's emphasizing good versus evil in a very centrist kind of way, where there's a good Jedi and a bad Jedi, and the confrontation of evil by the forces of good is something that is sort of redemptive or individuating. It allows someone through a hero's journey or a redemption arc to progress, to seek power and then let power go without really attaching it to anything outside of itself. It's holy, it's iconic, it's a rite of passage. That's Obi-Wan Kenobi. That is the sort of brand of Star Wars that stems from effectively 1981 onward, 1981, 1982, with The Empire Strikes Back, wherein things became much more about good versus evil. Things became much less dialectical, even though they were already kind of allegorical to the point of this is a space western with Flash Gordon vibes that is using Nazi pageantry in outer space to convey the totalitarian nature of U.S. foreign policy. It sort of relied on viewers to make a recent connection to contemporary history, the recent passing of the Vietnam War, and thinking about what was happening after that. And that was very much the independent George Lucas approach to things. But by the time you had The Empire Strikes Back, things became much more about, well, Luke has to confront Vader in order to progress, in order to become a man, in order to restore peace to the galaxy. There's just so much within the text that relies on Vader's presence. It's a linchpin of sorts. And this is very much a centrist idea, that the requiring of an evil team, not because it's commenting on material things, but because it's just necessary for the product to be entertaining. And that was something that was introduced through the Empire Strikes Back, I think, because the nature of the characters became much more operatic in scope. I'm not saying that the monomyth wasn't something that didn't exist in the original Star Wars, later rebranded as A New Hope, but they didn't lean into it nearly as much. And furthermore, the formula as introduced by The Empire Strikes Back in all of the planned films that followed, Return of the Jedi, but also the prequels and then the sequels that came later, like, they became very much ensconced within this sort of formula that requires Vader, or requires someone like Vader, as opposed to just commenting on how things are, which is very much how Andor does it. So in Andor's case, you have the riot scene, and the riot scene is talking about things in a much more dialectical way. It's much less concerned with good versus evil in the iconic kind of way. The use of sacred, holy icons that people can recognize by sight, but sort of consume passively. They're not connecting them in a Marxist sense to the real world. They're not being active, critical thinking consumers. They're being passive consumers in the case of franchised Star Wars. But Andor is much more independent, much more Marxist. It's coming from Disney, which is funny. But the approach to action is something that I think exemplifies the divergence of thought in either case, where in the scene finale, you have a treatment of confrontation as the climatic action, but one is the rioters who are confronting the Empire at its very sort of vanguard. the tip of the spear. They're not having a conversation with the Emperor or Vader, who at this point would have been alive and well. But there's absolutely no mention of Vader at all, and only peripheral mention of the Emperor. Instead, they're meeting people on the ground, the army that has sort of moved in and has taken control of the town, and not just the town, everything around it, but you can only see that through conversations within the setting itself that stem far and wide, and it's all connected in a very intricate, dialogue-heavy kind of way. It's very dialectical because it doesn't really frame things as good versus evil. It's far more complicated because history is complicated and messy. Material, dialectical analysis through the presentation of history within the Star Wars universe, but in a very different way than Obi-Wan, which is all about, and then Darth Vader stepped off his ship and he looked really menacing and evil, and he's dressed in black and he has a red lightsaber, the red and the black, very much a fascist color scheme, and he is evil and bad. And in order for Obi-Wan to overcome his failures, his past failures, he has to confront Vader. Now, I would say that you could analyze this in a dialectical way and say that Obi-Wan personifies neoliberalism, centrism, the institution of the Jedi effectively as space cops and bringing order to the galaxy in a benign but ultimately liberal kind of way, an ostensibly benign kind of way. But really, they're destructive because they lead to the creation of Vader. Now, if you know anything about history at all, capitalism in crisis leads to fascism. So the Jedi are the police force of the West in space, effectively. They are the defenders of capitalism in space. And through their own complacency and willingness to engage with anyone, even if those individuals are kind of sus, they sort of ignore various red flags that lead to the rise of something more radical than themselves, but not really that different. Because what is a Sith if just a more radical Jedi with a different colored lightsaber that's willing to do whatever it takes to get the job done? So in that instance, Obi-Wan can personify neoliberalism. Obi-Wan can personify capitalism, and he's guilty about that. But in order for us to think about it like that, it's really up to us as viewers to sort of assign qualities to Obi-Wan. But it's just as possible for people to think about these things and say, all right, well, it doesn't have to mean anything at all. It's just Obi-Wan fighting Vader within a story that is vacated of all meaning, and you just have the icons, empty signifiers that at the same time become more real than reality in that very Matrix kind of way. The idea of hyper-reality, where the most real thing is the image, not the thing behind it. The image doesn't have to represent anything but itself, but that takes on its own meaning to people who endlessly consume it. So what I'm doing by assigning various qualities to Obi-Wan and saying, well, perhaps that's what's going on. That's me interacting with the text. That's not the text saying it itself. So it's a metatextual relationship between me and the thing I'm consuming, as opposed to the way that the text presents this is something that's going to play out in just a second when I push play, and Vader is going to walk off. The two of them are going to throw down, and they're not really having a conversation about anything, really, from what I understand. It's largely just a fight. And if there is dialogue, it's going to be that very operatic kind of dialogue where, oh, you're supposed to bring order and peace to the galaxy, not destroy it, that kind of thing. They're not really talking about anything except for a formula, and the formula isn't attached to anything. Whereas in Andor, it's very much the opposite, where they're going out of their way to display the material relationship between those with power and those without, and how those with power abuse those who are effectively under the Empire's thumb. Alright, so let's get started here. So again, you have all the obvious kind of things. Slow walking, menacing Vader. He kind of glides across the floor like a ghost in that very gothic kind of way. Sort of like Father Shidoni from Anne Radcliffe's The Italian. You know, he has the cloak and the swooping kind of sound effects. The iconic breathing noise. It's very sort of painterly and artistic looking, but ultimately fantastical. It's literally empty and vague.
Have you come to destroy me, Obi-Wan?
I will do what I must.
And so, again, they're not talking about things through like an economic lens, like, I am the union and you revoked my pay, so this is worker action against the Empire. And then Vader is basically Elon Musk or Amazon, and he's the union buster, and he's going to go hire some scab workers or something. So that's not what's going on here at all. Whereas in Andor, that's exactly what's happening. And note here how you have these iconic characters. Everything is color coded. You have the music that sort of kicks off, and the action poses, and people eat this shit up too. Like, look at the number of likes on this. 146,000 likes, and comments like, to hear James Earl Jones' voice and Hayden Christensen's voice merged together was so awesome. And after getting his mask broken by Kenobi, letting him speak with his normal voice overriding Vader's, showing the same angst and hatred that Anakin had in Revenge of the Sith was a stroke of genius. I love how once Vader's suit is broken, he almost immediately goes from a cold, intimidating villain to a sympathetic, broken man who's barely alive. So, in this sense, people are concerned within the story unto itself as not being connected to anything else. It's a holy text that doesn't try and say anything about the real world. It's just pure escapism. But nevertheless, I would bet money that people that look at that kind of thing will have their views informed by this type of text. Good versus evil, the United States versus the Middle East, the war on terror, the axis of evil, and the shifting assemblage or sequence of recursive alliances oscillating back and forth, where one moment you have Saddam Hussein, who's the good guy according to the United States, and then the next moment he's the bad guy. And who's deciding that? Those in power. And what type of theater do they use? Star Wars, that kind of thing. So it's just something I want to keep in mind as we watch this, is this could very easily be a propaganda film wherein the displaced action is used in a very empty kind of way that nevertheless is used to enforce real-world political views. That holy sort of sound, oh, it's literally sacred, church-like. We're going to church right now. And what is our religion? Star Wars. It's a very passive, uncritical approach to the universe. And that's not to say that we can't enjoy it. I love me a good chorus. I love me a good evil versus good kind of arrangement where you have demons and angels. But there's a difference between having something like that sort of unironically and something, I don't know, even like Paradise Lost, which had something to say about England, you know, when Milton wrote that story. And I feel like Star Wars, within the text itself, is not really saying anything about the real world. It's just going through pure, simplified emotions.
then you will die.
That's sort of the consequence, too, is, oh no, what's at stake here? Obi-Wan's gonna die. That's literally it. And see how, like, short-sighted that is, where the fate of the entire story is literally just that of one individual against another. It's a very personal kind of struggle, and it doesn't try and connect it to anything else. It's like Obi-Wan isn't the way that Obi-Wan is because of economics or his faulty viewpoints. It's just him and another guy basically having a sword fighting match. It's a contest of wills. You have the different angles. There is so much emphasis on the different ways that they're trying to convey this. It's almost like a porno, you know, where you have two dudes sword fighting in a very homosocial kind of way, and they're getting the strokes of their weapons from all of these different vantage points, just like a porno where you're watching the penetration and it's like, okay, from above, from the side, from behind, point of view shots, her point of view, his point of view. And I feel like that's kind of what's going on here. And it's very choreographed, it's very fancy, and like, don't get me wrong, I like this kind of thing as a critical thinker because I can attach certain values to Obi-Wan. But again, that's me deconstructing the text. And when a lot of people think of postmodernism or deconstruction, they think you're just taking it apart and you're totally disassembling it. Well, no, it's just you relating to the text. It's just a meta sort of arrangement where you are responding to the text in an active, critical way. You're deconstructing its unironic, wholly canonical sort of purpose, and you're thinking about, like, okay, Obi-Wan's the guilty capitalist sort of agent who led to capitalism in crisis, which created someone like Vader. But I feel like a lot of people, a lot of the target audience or the target demographic is supposed to just, according to Disney, who just want to make money off this, they just want you to respond to Vader, red, Obi-Wan, blue, music playing, holy, and they want you to shell out. That's it. That's all they care about. There's a lot of like twirling too. Like the sword fighting is very, very different than like real quick here. Corridor cruise to the death, where you have this sword fight between these Jedi. And there's a lot less twirling going on. Let's see where.
Right. Perfect distance at the right time. Right now, the teacher controls both.
And the way that they're fighting, where they're just facing each other and they're kind of shuffling back and forth, and they're using their swords in a way that actual sword fighters would use. And now, to be fair, the point of this whole skit is, I'm just going to turn off the sound, you don't really need it. Like, these dudes are totally like, they're literally instructed to fight as actual sword fighters would, as opposed to something like this, where you have Obi-Wan and like when they're fighting, there's a lot more twirling, a lot more spinning. Like it's, again, that old school Flash Gordon, right? That's that stage fighting where it's all about big swooping visuals, where you're communicating everything through big theatrical action. And you're kind of leaving it up to the viewer to form their own conclusions about what's being said. And despite making this point, I will say that this particular video is also something that isn't really invested in saying anything other than the poetry of the sword fight, something literally to teach in a school. And I have to admit, though, just purely from a choreographed standpoint, I do prefer this kind of thing, but it's also quick. It's also brutal. You know, there is this realistic component. It's much less sweeping and romantic, quite literally. You know, it's very to the point. It's very quick. Whereas this is not. It's more protracted. It's more drawn out. They also have like the slow, dramatic kind of like posing where they're like, all right, now it's time to get serious. I think with this kind of thing, in a real fight, you wouldn't give Obi-Wan a moment to catch his breath, because the whole point is like, your powers are weak, old man. You know, once you were the master, now I'm the master, that kind of thing. And it's really the same thing that's been told over and over and over, where again, Vader's just a roadblock to progression from a sort of like path of the warrior kind of sense. It's just the hero's journey and something that you're supposed to face and like hopefully overcome and learn something from it. But it doesn't really teach you anything. It's just that you're not supposed to force choke people, I guess. Don't be mindful about who your boss is. Like, I don't know. Like, it's very, very much just, again, it could go either way in terms of, it could go many different ways in terms of what you want to assign to it. But just because that's the case doesn't mean that, you know, there is an intended narrative, an intended emptying, a lack of class consciousness as people consume Star Wars, and they're expected to just pay money and not look too closely at actual U.S. foreign policy all the while. And not only that, to think about it in terms of good versus evil in a way that makes them complicit to genocide. And it's so predictable, in fact, that you can just look at the history of it and you could say, oh, well, you can interpret Star Wars however you want. Yes, that's true. But history plays out in ways where these types of things are only possible if people tolerate them. But the fact remains that even if people aren't actively protesting in the street, they're nevertheless apathetic. You know, there are people signing up and going overseas and recruiting. And that is something that you can track and see from the Korean War to Vietnam to the Gulf War to the Second War in Iraq to Afghanistan, any of the other Middle Eastern conflicts, to the war in the Ukraine and the way that that's being handled. Like, and that's just in that particular region of the world. Say nothing of the actions of the CIA and the global South. And there's just a lot of things like that you can look at and you can make connections to, all right, well, if people are complicit, where are they getting that complicity from? Well, a willingness to turn their brain off and spend their money on disposable income that discourages them, but also their next of kin, the next in line, the next generation, to think about things in an increasingly empty way. And just appreciate the sword fighting as the end-all be-all. Like, it's just a perpetual, endless conflict. There must be a good guy and a bad guy. They have to be fighting, and that's it. And if that's it, that's good. Everything is as it should be. And I, for one, think that that's horseshit. The whole point of stories like this, in my mind, is they should encourage people to think critically. They should not make people complacent or happy as long as you throw in a protracted sword fight where most of the budget obviously went. And don't get me wrong, I can appreciate just the Tombstone-esque sort of graveyard kind of place where they're fighting, and the color scheme, and is it cartoonish and kind of, obviously sort of fantastical? Sure, I can still kind of enjoy that, but at the end of the day, I recognize that this is a big AAA product that is made for people to consume on a mass level to perpetuate the relationship between corporations and consumers, wherein one is constantly putting out these products that the other is expected to buy, and only do that. Make money, work, buy Star Wars, don't protest the actual wars that these types of stories parallel, quite obviously. It's Star Wars. Literally, war displaced, taken to somewhere else in outer space. They can't hide that, but they can disguise it. They can present it as just a neutral product. I know I'm supposed to just be watching this right now and being like, oh, is it exciting? Well, I don't it's just a protracted sword fight that goes on for a really long time, and the idea is that Vader is like, I'm strong, and Obi-Wan is like, oh no, I'm being threatened by your scary force powers. Am I going to be tempted to become evil? Can I escape the mistakes of my past? It's not really that interesting to me. It's all emotional type stuff that doesn't really attempt to look at things dialectically, in a material sense. Yeah, it's dialectical in the sense of opposing forces, but it's not Marxist, because it doesn't make any sort of material argument relative to dialectical forces. It's just the hero's journey, between two different generations, and the sins of the surrogate sort of father, and you were my brother, Anakin, I loved you, I hate you, and that's pretty much it. It's very much a WWF style sort of brawl where the good guy's winning, the bad guy's winning, it goes back and forth, anything could happen, it's anyone's game. And I used to consume that kind of thing when I was 12, and it used to be really, really exciting, but the over-reliance on it within stories, it's it risks sort of hijacking the narrative and becoming the whole point. Because what do people think of when they think of Star Wars? Even within everything but the first film has a lengthy sword fight that goes on for way too long, and is a protracted sword fight that's generally sort of cross-cut with a larger sweeping operatic narrative of war, of good versus evil. And it's I get what they're doing, it just doesn't, I don't care. And you could argue that I am not the ideal sort of viewer for this type of thing, but whatever. There's that, but the fact remains that there's just not a lot that's going on except for the action within its own self-contained kind of narrative, and it's not saying anything outside of that. It's not connecting it to anything in the material world. Oh, help. I'm falling in the pit. I'm in trouble now. I guess I could turn the sound on, but it's just... It's very gothic, right? Help, I'm being buried alive. That kind of thing. A specter of the past. The monster that he created is burying him alive. It's kind of Frankensteinian, I suppose. But again, I'm, at the end of the day, I'm the one who's sort of interpreting that. But it's also that sort of gothic, loose, sort of neutral, disconnected analysis is sort of what they're sort of going for here, with that oscillating action narrative between good versus evil that's very much disconnected from material reality. And Obi-Wan here is using the Force to not get crushed by all of the earth and the stones. And this is the narrative struggle where it's like, I'm going to overcome my past failings and sort of unbury myself in a very sort of Kill Bill 2 style kind of way. And of course you have the montage, and he's like, he's got to do it for the kid. It's like, all right, or Leia, right? So he fucked up once. He's not going to fuck up again. He's going to be a better parent this kind of round. Which is a very neoliberal kind of thing. You know, it's like, yeah, we fucked up before, but we won't fuck up this time. It'll be better. They're just kicking the can down the road. Because even after all of this, what happens, right? The Mandalorian, like the Empire comes back. Why does it come back? Because this type of story takes away class consciousness and allows those in power to have power and just trot out these meaningless illusions in front of people. That's Star Wars at its worst, I think, critically speaking. Haha. And now we're back to more sword fighting. And now you have that sort of wrestling kind of narrative. You have the heel and the baby face, and they are fighting, and now Obi-Wan is revived and he is going to win. You could swap this out for any kind of anime villain, like this is Goku, old Goku, I guess, and that's Frieza, and they're fighting on Namek or something, and like, okay. But at the end of the day, it's just violence, it's just force. And Dragon Ball in particular is very much about perpetuating that, an endless conflict where, again, they want it to be endless because it's profitable, instead of leading the world towards a true mode of peace beyond capitalism, beyond nation states. Nation states are very bad. They monopolize violence. The media that comes forth from them is inherently disingenuous and controlling, propagandistic in a way that leads people to become apathetic towards genocide, that kind of thing. So Star Wars to them is just a sacred tool by which to hide behind atrocities committed by those in power. So they want this kind of thing to go on forever and ever. Think about this just as something within the universe, as a commodity to sell, as opposed to, wait a second, Vader is something that happened. Well, why did it happen? What if we could stop it from happening? And not just him. What if we could stop the Emperor from happening? The Empire, the New Order from happening? What if we could stop fascism from coming about? As opposed to, well, we're a ship sailing through the ocean and, oh, there's the fascist iceberg and it's going to crash into us. And that doesn't... like that kind of like proactive preventative approach as opposed to a reactive manipulative approach, which is obviously what the bourgeoisie want to do because they don't want to stop war. They don't want to stop these kind of narratives as something that's just neutral, devoid of meaning. They want the buffer, they want the veil, they want people to consume, they don't want them to think. So this kind of thing is much safer for them to do, but it's difficult for people to ignore the material reality. Even something like the war in the Ukraine is having a geopolitical sort of shockwave effect that's affecting people in the global north. They're not experiencing genocide full on, but just a change in food prices or something like that, and they get war fatigue, like actual war fatigue, not the glorification of war in something like Star Wars, where you can consume it, you can consent to it, you're like, okay, it's all around you, but there's this veneer or facade of empowerment through the middle class consumer as someone who has some kind of choice, ostensibly, in whether or not they're in control. In point of fact, Star Wars is everywhere, and it's very difficult for you to find narratives that are very different. Like Andor, to put things in perspective, is the first thing that in 40 years that is any different, it feels like. And this is just the same old tired formula. And there's that cognitive dissonance where people are starting to wake up and realize that capitalism leads to fascism. You know, all this posturing, this liberalism, freedom, democracy, those sort of liberal platitudes of the West that are used to basically dress up war as we are the good guys. We just keep getting tangled geopolitically in things, but we made a mistake like Obi-Wan did, and it led to a problem like Vader, but don't worry, we'll fix it this time. But then it keeps happening. That's called a cycle of abuse, and it's generational, it's global, and ultimately, in order to escape from that, you have to have a different approach than what's going on here. I notice how I have the sound turned off, because it's like, whatever, these dudes are fighting, and like, alright, yeah, I've already kind of broken down what's going on. It's just a mechanism, a neutral, escapist mechanism with a back and forth wrestling style narrative of good versus evil. And alright, so now he's able to slowly dissect Vader and damage his suit. He's fighting dirty a little bit, right? He's literally cutting off his life force, his oxygen flow, that kind of thing. Looks like he sliced him across the back, but I guess his cape is lightsaber proof, which is an interesting idea. Aw, shit. Yeah, this is like the coup de grace, right? Well, not quite the coup de grace, but oh, he broke the helmet, he took the mask off, and the whole point of demasking fascism, like if we're thinking about this critically, is to show the person underneath as a fraud, as a charlatan, for all that bombast, all that bluster. You know, he's the badass, he's the Dark Knight. No, he's broken and pathetic, because fascism is something that is inherently abusive towards people within the in-group. Those who seem to have power are destroyed from within by themselves, by their own system, by their own ideas. And furthermore, though, Obi-Wan is someone who's constantly put into this situation where, like, he can never seem to make things right, because it constantly leads to the creation of people like Darth or institutions like Darth. But a story like this is absolutely unequipped to sort of comment on that kind of thing. It can only present you with endless sword fights through this particular approach, mind you. Another problem with this is it's humanizing Vader, and it's communicating Vader as someone to sort of feel sorry for. It's like, don't feel sorry for him. He's a fucking Nazi. Okay? He is something that we can't tolerate. And now I will say that when rehabilitating people, you have to rehabilitate them as individuals who did bad things, while giving them the opportunity to change. But you can't let the humanizing of monsters give them a pass either. And a story like this, I feel, is like where it's like, all right, the moment he loses the fight, we're supposed to feel sorry for him. And it just sort of like jumps to that. And it doesn't really have an instance or a moment where he comes clean and he's rehabilitated. Like, it's just a flicker of humanity, but one where it's like not earned. And he's demasked and we're like, oh, I feel sorry for you. And that's just a lull in the action kind of thing, because even after this fight ends, Vader goes on to keep fucking shit up and being an asshole. So he doesn't learn anything from this fight.
I am what remains.
I am what remains. And you have the contrast between Hayden Christensen's goofy sounding voice and James Earl Jones's badass kind of voice. Again, that cognitive dissonance where you're placing them alongside each other. And yeah, it's a cool idea. I like it. It's gothic enough. But this is the end of the show, and it's not like he's learning how to be rehabilitated in a way to prevent this kind of thing from happening again. Like, Vader at the end of the original trilogy is killed, and then the New Order happens. That's a problem. But something like this, it just uses this whole cycle of back and forth between good and evil. It's just something to sell tickets, to sell prescriptions, to make money. It's all about profit. And he can say whatever he wants, like yakety yak yak, and then he's like, yeah, whatever, look at me, I'm a zombie. He's like, oh no, my zombie stepson, I'm so sad. Like, who cares? Like, honestly, this is so not what we should be focusing on at this point. I wasn't even impressed with the sword fighting in this, honestly. It's like, sure, the Vader costume is kind of nice just from a production value sort of standpoint, but that's always been, again, the emphasis on costumes within theatrical sort of stage plays. This has a very much a stage play kind of feel because everything is literally on a sound stage and they're fighting with swords. Again, the adventures of Errol Flynn in Robin Hood, that kind of thing, or the adventures of Robin Hood with Errol Flynn, that sort of stage play, fighting on a stage with swords. It goes all the way back to like Shakespeare and that kind of thing. And costumes were a huge part of that. So if you don't get the costume right, you're fucked, right? You're dead in the water. And so that's like the bare minimum of this kind of story. And yeah, I can read into it and sort of pull things out of the narrative by thinking about it critically myself. But again, the story just doesn't offer that. It just feels like a brainless kind of sword fight, really. And that's been a problem with Star Wars since The Empire Strikes Back. Like, The Empire Strikes Back is a good space opera, you know, just in terms of the kind of story that it's trying to tell. But at the end of the day, it's very much about good versus evil, told through this kind of story. Like, Luke, I am your father. It's very similar to this kind of thing, where he's horrified because he has to look at Vader and make the connection between sort of a familial connection that he's ashamed of, and Luke and The Empire Strikes Back, you know, it's a relationship between literal father and son, the long lost father, that kind of thing. Whereas this is like a surrogate father. Very similar kind of thing going on emotionally. I'm not saying that it's not something you can use to communicate a narrative, but you have to eventually get to the point. You have to communicate things materially in a way that leads to class consciousness happening, people recognizing that the bourgeoisie are fucking ghouls that take advantage of people by constantly putting out stories like this in a way that invite them to be passive, to be uncritical, to just consume. And he's like, all right, whatever, I'm bored, I'm done. Just like Goku on Namek, where he's like, okay, I hope you live the rest of your life in peace. Well, what happened in that? Frieza came back. Good job, Goku. You fucking idiot. Good job, Obi-Wan. Why didn't you just kill Vader? You know, at the very least, you know, it's not going to stop the Empire, but you would stop Vader from being a fucking psycho and murdering a bunch of people. If you're not going to rehabilitate him and actively take some kind of step in his rehabilitation in a way that leads him to become a force for, well, you know, good, then put him down at the very least. But he doesn't even do that. He's just like, whatever, I won the fight. That's enough. That should speak for itself. Again, it's the rational argument made by moderates. The moderate display of force. He defeated him in the free marketplace of ideas. That should speak for itself. But notice how the Empire keeps coming back. Doesn't matter if he lost face. I will say that, you know, presenting the strong man as weak is something to sort of initially defang fascists. And I think realistically, if like Vader were a political leader, like Richard Spencer getting punched in the face and him running away. But here's the thing: he doesn't run away. You know, he shows Obi-Wan his ass and is like, "Look at me, I am what remains." But he doesn't cower, he doesn't grovel, he doesn't retreat. You know, he stands strong, and it's kind of like that fight scene in Cool Hand Luke, where the big guy is just beating up on Paul Newman's character Luke, and eventually he gets tired and just like walks away. Well, who won the fight? Luke did, because the other guy gave up. So in this instance, from the fascist point of view, he's like, I showed strength even in defeat. So he's able to sort of hold on to power. I don't think he doesn't run away like Richard Spencer did, for instance. You know, and it's very much a fascist kind of trick. Oh sure, yeah, you humbled me in combat, and I'll do better next time. Now, and Star Wars doesn't address that. It doesn't like. There's no like free and direct discourse where it's like, and this is where the problem is. This is the problem with moderacy. This is the problem with tolerating Nazis. This is the problem with a cycle of endless war where evil is self-defeating. Like, notice how it keeps coming back. This is the problem with icons that teach people not to think critically. So lonely, so sad and alone. All right, so there's that. That's Obi-Wan. Kind of, well, dumb. Not a fan of that. So now let's switch over to the dialectical materialism of Andor. All right, so real quick before we jump into things, the approach to this, there's nary a Jedi in sight, no lightsabers, no sword fights. This is very much a social engagement between a large group of people. You have the Imperial dudes dressed in black, you have the townsfolk, the musicians, the various members of the funeral procession, and then you have the workers, and it's almost on multiple levels even. You got some dudes in the back there, and then you got old Marva here, who's standing before people like a ghost, and it's very different than that sort of Jedi ghost where they're like watching over you and you'll know what to do. Like, her message is completely different from Obi-Wan's. It doesn't speak in riddles. Like, from a certain point of view, Vader was dead, or Anakin was dead, and he became Vader. And it's very vague and unhelpful. Whereas this ghost is much more cut and dry in terms of what they're communicating. And the large emphasis here is this is her audience. So the fascist people are actually behind her. So when she's talking, she's looking at all of the townsfolk who are stretched out like a snake before her and sort of encircling her. And the voice of her, she lives on through the robot, basically like R2-D2, help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi, you're my only hope. But the message here is, again, very different. It's a canned message in both cases, but the point of the message is very different. You know, in Luke, someone who dreams of adventure, going and fighting the Empire, but the first thing he says when he sees that is, who is she? She's beautiful. You know, he has a boner, basically, and he wants to rescue the princess. And part of the fun in that movie is that, well, she kind of saves him. Into the garbage chute, flyboy. And, you know, she doesn't fuck around. So, I mean, but that's neither here nor there. That's the 1977 approach to Star Wars, and which is, again, different from the style of Star Wars that we just watched, for instance, which is basically just lightsaber fights. Whereas in this case, the message is like a call to action. Workers of the world unite. You have only to lose your chains. And everything is illustrated through collective action, through collective punishment by those in power and those responding to it, which leads to not a sword fight between two dudes, but a riot, a very different kind of thing. This could easily be about George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement and, punch a cop, kick a Nazi, that kind of thing. Fight those in power, class consciousness. So totally different approach. And while notice how all of the icons are removed from the scene as well. There are no like obvious Star Wars signifiers that were franchised by George Lucas. He's guilty of that. A sort of billionaire Marxism where, all right, we're gonna hide the message behind the cartoon and sell all of this merchandise. What kind of merchandise are they going to sell for Andor? It's not really that kind of show. And I think it's better for it. It's something that you could watch over and over, almost like a manifesto.
My name is Marva Karasi Andor. I'm honored to stand before you.
I love this too. It kind of reminds me of Hamlet, Hamlet's father's ghost, where she looks a little out of it. She has, her eyes are sort of sunken in and dark around the sockets. She has the raccoon eyes. She looks like she's dying, like she's a ghost. She's a specter. She doesn't look healthy here, and she doesn't look fully all there, but enough for her to sort of struggle to reach through the void and remember what she needs to say to those who are still living. She's speaking from beyond the grave.
I'm honored to be a daughter of Ferrix, and honored to be worthy of the stone.
Here, she's addressing a funeral passage, but also a political movement like the Daughters of Ferrix is something that gets addressed repeatedly throughout the show. And these are various members. Like, this is a surviving member of the Daughters of Ferrix, and there's someone who stands up against the Empire. So that's very different than, say, the approach to Star Wars by George Lucas and company, like the Disneyfied, commodified, franchised approach to Star Wars, where they really, really try and shy away from politics. Like, they do talk about like economics and stuff like that, but it's always like in a very sort of Tolkien-esque approach to things, where you have this planet and it has a king or a prince, some type of ruling class that has a council, an emergency council, and help, we're being oppressed by those pesky merchants or something. But here you have a very obvious political group. They're dressed in red, and they're about to riot, being incited to riot as a form of collective worker action against their oppressors. And this is all like, this isn't subtle. This is literally a dialogue within the text. It's not something that I have to really touch upon actively. And I think people who are used to consuming Star Wars much more passively through the sacred kind of icons are going to have to dismiss or try and interpret something like this in bad faith. They have to suck the meaning out of the text, as opposed to being given something where there isn't really a lot of meaning to begin with.
Strange. Feel as if I could with their truth.
You have the Judas kind of character there. Everyone's kind of listening. It's a very self-contained scene too. Like, they're not cross-cutting back and forth. All of our attention is just on Marva. And see how I have the sound turned on for this one? Like, I actually have like an attachment to this character, her cause, what she's all about. Like, this is a funeral where someone died, and I'm like showing up, and I feel like I'm within that crowd, okay? And I'm like, I want to hear what she has to say, because the content of the message is important. And as she keeps talking, she's going to say, like, look, my life doesn't matter. What matters is the message. I don't want to be remembered All that you need to know is to fight the Empire. Never surrender.
I'm dead. We took their money and ignored them. We kept their engines churning, and the moment they pulled away...
I will say that this is edited, so it's just focusing on the speech. It's not the... Because there is some cross-cutting within the scene. You can still hear, that there are various people kind of moving around, including Cassian, and he's going to rescue Bix, I think. And so this is edited in such a way to just have Marva's speech before the final battle, but a very different kind of battle than what we got with Obi-Wan Kenobi.
We forgot them.
You do have a little bit of her kind of moving around, or Cass kind of moving around. So I'm not sure exactly what they're cutting out here, but there are little edits.
Because we had each other. We had Ferrix.
The music is wonderful in this scene too, because you have diegetic music where you have the funeral procession playing, and then you do have the non-diegetic music, the music that the audience hears, but not the people in the show. And it's a very different kind of thing where we're not going to church and we're not listening to something that's meant to turn off our brains. Like this is an emotional appeal because music is generally designed to evoke emotions relative to a narrative arc, something like that. It corresponds to the action unless it's like ironic or like bad music. Like if they had like, I don't know, just something that really isn't supposed to go. Like you could have like Led Zeppelin or Britney Spears or something playing over this, and it would be like really, really out of place. Well, you could say that's the point, but that would be like a transformative like parody of what's going on with this scene. But the makers and what they did, obviously they were going for something where, all right, we're supposed to listen, we're supposed to pay attention, all of these people are standing around, and the music kind of reflects the solemn, earnest nature of the Marva, the ghost, giving one last speech before she's silenced forever by the boots of space Nazis.
But we were sleeping. I've been sleeping.
We were asleep, right? False consciousness, class consciousness is something that is dormant, and it's just waiting for the spark that lights the fire.
I've been turning away from a truth I wanted not to face. The Empire is a disease that thrives in...
I love that too, like when he's listening and he's like, there are these allusions to him being sort of like corrupted. He lives in the darkness and he betrays people and he leads a double life, and he's not going to live to see the rebellion come to fruition. And yet when she's speaking, she's also speaking to him, and you have that tiny trace of a smile that otherwise breaks his cold, mask-like visage.
Darkness. It is never more alive.
He almost looks guilty, actually, because he's thinking about killing Cassian, and Cassian sort of helped kick everything off. And of course Marva says, like, look, through a correspondent who survives her, tells Cassian, like, don't feel bad. You're not responsible. You're just the spark to a blaze that was going to happen sooner or later. And so again, it's larger than any one person. It's not just Luke defeating the Empire single-handedly, that kind of hero's journey, very much of American almost sort of propaganda, even in 1977. But here is very much de-emphasizing the nature of Cassian as the end-all be-all of like the single sort of savior, the spark of the rebellion, when really it's so much bigger than that. It's everybody here. And when he tries to like commit suicide at the end and be like, hey buddy, can you just like shoot me in the head now? And we all know what happens. So again, those heroic sort of propagandistic gestures that are generally sort of meant to convey things in a very singular, personified kind of way are utterly ignored here in favor of group or collective action against a imperial threat.
Than when we sleep. But I'll tell you this. If I could do it again.
I also, when I was watching this originally, one thing that I recognized immediately was, this is going to be a fucking riot. This isn't, and just within the show, it shows how the stormtroopers don't miss, and how they treat prisoners. Like, just because you're in a prison facility and you're doing labor, the whole point is that's just like a maximized ergonomic version of what this is. This is a prison too, and these people are prisoners of the Empire. And if they were willing to just kill everyone to keep the message from getting out, what do you think these fuckers are going to do to all these poor bastards when she says, fight the Empire? They respond to violence. They don't do it quite as quickly because this is out in the open. It's not hidden. It's not like in a factory prison setting where your rights are taken away and you're in a state of exception, where in heightened states of emergency, people whose rights are taken away, it occurs on different registers, right? Here, they're not in a prison. They're in more of like a social kind of prison as opposed to a literal one. But in the literal one, you have no rights at all. You don't even have a name. You're just a number, and they can kill you. Even if they're not supposed to, they can take further kind of liberties or transgressions against you. And they're more scared of doing that here because then they have to go mask off. They have to basically go full on Nazi, as opposed to, they're just cops right now. They're just SWAT, something like that, but they're not actively colonizing their citizens in public with people watching. Like, this is a PR nightmare. And when they do this, like the rebellion, when it starts to catch flame, the Empire becomes increasingly draconian. But they were already doing that in a response to, well, capitalism, ostensibly. We don't have a story before this that is presented within this particular narrative. Like, we have the prequels, of course, A Time of Peace, and capitalism and prosperity ostensibly leads to the rise of fascism, and the events that happen, merchants getting up to, various merchant shenanigans and stuff like that, and trade wars, and just a very unromantic approach to things leads to the rise of the Empire. And I forget exactly, I guess this must take place after Revenge of the Sith, but before A New Hope. So this is in between those. It's a interim narrative. And at this point, the Empire is something where you have someone who becomes chancellor, and then they become the emperor, and then when they seize formal power, they start taking away people's rights. And they take away people's rights in different ways. They take away people's rights by making it easier for them to be incarcerated, and then taking away various things when they're incarcerated. So workers get treated like shit when they're not in a literal prison, in the sense of, this is a prison, we're calling it a prison, as opposed to the prison that we see in front of us right now, a town, a mining town. It's its own kind of prison, right? But it's a little bit more figurative. Like, the function is identical, but it doesn't say it on the tin. And the various transgressions that they're willing to do behind closed doors within a facility that nobody's going to see because it's out in the middle of the fucking ocean. It's isolated. It's cut off from the rest of society. It's literally a death camp, right? Very similar to the atrocities committed during the Holocaust, during the more industrialized kinds of situations where the Empire is colonizing its own population. And it's doing it away from mainstream society, the middle class, basically. Well, now they run the risk of having to go mask off. And that's like literally the crux of the drama here. That's why they don't just start gunning everyone down like they did during the prison scene. they're like, they killed everyone. The message got out and they just fucking killed everyone. Well, they don't do that here. They're actually kind of scared to. But eventually it becomes a battle where the workers unite and they start throwing down because they kick the droid. You know, fuck that. That droid is awesome.
I'd wake up early and be fighting.
Wake up early. Wake up before it's too late. Wake up before the mask is off. Like, look at these helmets. They have kind of a stormtrooper feel, but they also kind of look like actual real world uniforms. Star Wars was always doing that, but it's hard not to look at this now and not think of SWAT the way that they exist in the United States, for instance, watching an actual riot and the way that cops will kill people in front of you. And there's not really a lot that you can do unless you're willing to get violent. You know, there's civil disobedience, nonviolent resistance, and then there's violent resistance. And in the absence of justice, there can be no peace.
These bastards! From the start! Fight the Empire!
And the illusion of power, where he's trying to present himself as someone who's in charge, very similar to Vader getting demasked. And now the mask is off, and you see them not just as weak, right? They don't have as much power as they claim to be, but you also see their intentions for what they are. Their bad faith intentions are exposed, and these people are not gonna suffer it. And things start to get very unromantic. Like, he literally just clubbed that dude with a brick, which is the brick that contains the ashes of Marva. So he basically hit that dude with a crystallized dead person. And then, yeah, fuck it, let's throw down. You know, party time, boys. Collective action.
Make it stop now!
And in this instance, like, they're trying to silence the message, silence the bells, because the bells are a code, and you have someone throwing bombs. Like, and this is a very indiscriminate kind of attack where it's going to lead to collateral damage, but it's obviously something not everyone's in on it. I think, you know, there are probably some people in the crowd that aren't a part of the resistance more actively, that don't know that this dude has a bomb. Like some people will probably just spectators. So this is an ugly, messy kind of fight, but that's the nature of this kind of struggle. You know, if you have a gentlemanly agreement where, all right, let's just talk with fascists in the free marketplace of ideas, then you basically have the prequels. And that just leads to fascism. And then you're stuck in this situation. What they're trying to do here is they're trying to break the cycle. And there's not really any way to do that without some casualties on both sides. That nature of the explosion and the way the glass shatters, and it just, you can feel it just entering that guy's eyes and face, and it's just a very nasty, like, oh shit, are you okay, dude? Like, I think that guy's not feeling so good right now. But it's a very warlike, gritty kind of thing. It's not sweeping romantic sword fighting. It's a face full of shrapnel. It's also sort of a visual metaphor where you have a chain reaction and things are just going to start fucking blowing up. And at this point, now they have the fascists have their casus belli. Well, don't fire unless you're fired upon, even though it's their own grenades blowing up. Here, I mean, yeah, it's the whole point of recursive punishment is reactive abuse, is you put people in a situation where you goad them, you prod them until somebody snaps, and then you use that to react in a very violent kind of way, like Kyle Rittenhouse, right? Where he has a rifle, he has armor, and he's like, I'm not doing anything, bro. I'm not doing anything, bro. And he just bullies these people until they fight back with skateboards and their fists primarily. And there may have been a gun involved too. And yeah, like that kind of thing is. But the people that he killed, like, he didn't kill the gunmen. Like, he was there to kill protesters, and that's what he did. And from what I understand, the person who fired the gun wasn't injured in that particular instance. But the point isn't to debate the finer aspects of what Kyle Rittenhouse did, but to highlight the bad faith kind of reactive abuse, where it's like, all right, you pen these people in, you bully them, they're there to protest, and then you show up armed to fight and then act like you're not there for that. You're not fooling anyone the same way that these fascists are. You're not keeping the peace. You're there aggressively and posturing in a way where, oh, we didn't do anything wrong, we were attacked, and then you use that as an excuse to start killing people with extreme prejudice. And that's what's happening here. This is what the Empire wants. Open fire. Like, they're kind of, this is what he lives for. This is literally his job. He is trained for this. But also someone who's not fully prepared to take on, like, the duties of his station. Like, he's not like some all-powerful badass. He's not Darth Vader. He's just some dork. And here we see the role of the stormtroopers in a way that we generally don't, where they're killing civilians, they're killing rioters, and they don't care who they're killing at this point. Open fire. They're not discriminating. I don't think I'd want to headbutt a helmet like that. Like, I get the point. Like, he's a big burly dude, and it's that action kind of thing going on. But it's still, it seems like the stormtroopers. That's kind of a visual trope, I guess, where their armor doesn't seem to really work very well when people fight back, and that's, from a Marxist standpoint, I think important. This is asymmetrical warfare. It doesn't matter that they're decked out in all this nice gear. When push comes to shove, workers are a lot more dangerous collectively than they are when they're divided. And it doesn't matter that stormtrooper, is decked out in his gear. It's not going to save him at the end of the day if the whole town decides to fight back. And another thing is, like, these stormtroopers, it's like shooting fish in a barrel, where they're firing from an elevated position down at a group of people. Like, it's such a pussy thing to do. And you have, like, they have blasters, they have this giant mounted cannon, and they're not even shooting rebels at this point. Not someone who's like, all right, obviously rebels. Like, not everyone is really on the same page as far as the whole collective action thing goes, but they don't care. They're just literally shooting men, women, children. And another thing, like, see, the feel of this is like totally different than what's going on. Like in Obi-Wan Kenobi. Like in Obi-Wan Kenobi, it's like, well, I beat Vader in a sword fight, so I guess that just clears everything up, huh? Yep, totally can just walk away from this. See you later. And then we cut to Andor, which is literally a sequel to Obi-Wan Kenobi. And no, that didn't solve shit. The only thing it did was make Obi-Wan feel a little bit better about himself. It's like a really like selfish kind of narrative. And here, the consequences of, well, just the Jedi and capitalism in space is this kind of horse shit happening and people having to deal with it. I like that guy who's like getting into it. He's like, yeah, my bells, they mean something different today. And I like how he just yeets this guy. See you later. Like, there's a little bit of humor involved in the show, but by and large, I feel like they didn't have the Wilhelm scream, for instance. Like, this is very much a serious affair. Like, you might say there's a little bit of gallows humor with something like that, but also the context of it. It's like this guy is like going up there to shut him up while all of his uniformed buddies are curb stomping all of the bell tower players' friends. So it's like, it's also like, yeah, I'd fucking kick that guy out of the tower too. And they cut away because what ends up happening is she's like rescued, and there's that whole Brazil in reverse kind of thing going on. But and you have him and listening and watching, and you have the echoes of the screaming people, the smoke, the blasters in the distance. So this is a large conflict, and you can see the bell tower though, which lets you know, all right, this is where the street is. He's retreated. He's kind of watching. He's pulling away. It gives you kind of an uneasy feeling because he's not like a purely good person. He's something where the rebellion is going to require certain people to have to die in this struggle. Like, it's not that they're asking it even, but it's just a natural consequence of fighting the elite, fighting the bourgeoisie, fighting those who think they can just take whatever they want. And he's someone who sort of operates in the background. Quite literally, you know, if the fighting is going on here, then this is the background for here. And he's just sort of watching, guiltily, but also dressed in black and ready to sort of proceed in the mission. It's like, okay, well, that sucked, but this is happening everywhere. So I think he's a little bit jaded at this point, but he's also prepared to do what's necessary to make sure that the rebellion happens. Like, you can't just give a speech and do a display. Like, you have to keep going. You don't just riot once. Like with the Black Lives Matter, they needed to keep rioting, but they stopped. You know, there was collective action, but then it stopped. It's like, no, you need to keep going. And he's prepared to do just that, to organize collective action, to lead to rebellion, an organized, conscious rebellion, where it's not just isolated incidents of fighting against the empire, but something more unified. All right, so there you go. In any event, yeah, that's the very different sort of approach to action and climax in terms of how Andor goes about it in a very dialectically material kind of way, which is, I wish it would lean into the whole, hey, the Jedis are complicit in the rise to fascism. Obi-Wan didn't just fail being like a stepfather or mentor, like he failed all of the people who are dying here. You know, the Jedi are absolutely, like, again, defending like civilization, like the West in space, capitalism in space, and the Jedi is basically allowing these things to happen through meaningless gestures. Even the combat that they have with their swords is just part of a larger theater that pulls the wool over people's eyes. And someone like Luthen is like, yeah, no, it's very different than that. Now I guess we could pull up like Luthen's speech here, just because I think it sort of summarizes something. Like, you have actions speaking louder than words, right? Well, there are still words or a message behind actions in organized rebellion, and that's exemplified here.
Sacrifice means nothing to you, does it?
I said I think of you constantly, and
Alright, I don't know why they had to put piano over it. It's very unnecessary. Let the words speak for themselves.
And what do you sacrifice?
And when he's giving this speech, like, we've watched how he operates, and him throwing people under the bus, him lying, him planning to kill Cass, And ironically, Cass is saved by the Empire, because if he was just kind of wandering around doing his own thing, perhaps the rebellion would have found him and killed him, but then perhaps they would have failed. The rebellion would have ended before it began. So there's this sense of like action isn't something where you can even rely on singular heroes doing things in a way that is just like strictly from point A to point B, like pure competence. Like a large part of the success of the rebellion is a series of accidents where both sides, the Empire and the rebels, are engaging back and forth, and the middlemen and the people working behind the shadows pulling the strings, in sort of the gray area. And it's like, how did this work? But it feels a lot more realistic in that respect. Like, there's no way that these things play out very neatly where you just have like a simple sort of canal chase, just stay on target and just, well, turn off your targeting computer and you use the force. You know, it doesn't work like that. And which is, again, I prefer Star Wars without all of that sort of like bombast and all of that kind of like simplistic approach to language and narrative, and presenting it as like Cass is someone who gets lucky in ironic ways where the Empire saves his life because this guy isn't scared to make sacrifices. And yet I think his arc is someone who he's going to obviously spare Cass's life because Cass shows up to him at the end of episode 12 and is like, hey, shoot me. And he hands him the gun, and Luthen is pointing the gun at him, and he's like hesitating. And we all know that he's not going to do it, or I mean, the odds are, I mean, maybe there's something that happens, but the whole point of the narrative is that it's not a cheap writing device. Like, he realizes that his approach is kind of doomed to fail. Like, he has to be able to find people and not treat them as expendable assets, you know, learn to trust people, to work collectively. Teamwork makes the dream work. But up until that point, we have this gem of a speech where he, dressed in black, surrounded by darkness and shadows, is basically like, yeah, I'm beyond saving.
Calm. Kindness, kinship. Love. I've given up all chance at inner peace. I made my mind a sunless space.
He made his mind a sunless space. And yet, there's this moment, I think, where he, if that were actually true, would have killed Andor without a second thought. But he's constantly kind of like protecting him throughout the show. Like, he says one thing here, but then he kind of does another. And he gets a little help from accident, from fate, from the most unlikely of sources. Compelled prison labor, but at the end of the day, there is this hesitation where he seems convincing here, but there is this hesitation throughout the story that feels believable at the end. When he doesn't pull the trigger, it's not exactly a surprise either.
I share my dreams with ghosts. I wake up every day to an equation I wrote 15 years ago from which there's only one conclusion. I'm damned for what I do. My anger, my ego, my unwillingness to yield, my eagerness to fight, they set me on a path from which there's no escape. I yearn to be a savior against injustice without contemplating the cost, and by the time I look down, there's no longer any ground beneath my feet. What is my sacrifice?
I think the riot at the end of season 1 sort of brings it home to him, where he's constantly manipulating people in ways where he can't see what's happening to them. And I think the riot is kind of a wake-up call where he does feel guilty, and he does see that spark of revolution as something that needs to be perpetrated not just through people that you manipulate, but people that you work with, that you befriend. You stop talking with ghosts, and you bring the rebellion towards a unified front amongst living entities, that you're not like backstabbing constantly.
I'm condemned to use the tools of my enemy to defeat them. I burn my decency for someone else's future. I burn my life to make a sunrise that I know I'll never see.
The dialogue here is so good. It's funny too because it's being delivered by Stellan Skarsgård, the math teacher from Good Will Hunting, who hasn't really aged a day, it feels like. Speaking of ghosts, and it's just so very, very, very different from "Your powers are weak, old man. Now I am the master. Only a master of evil, Darth." Like, it's very, very different in flavor. It feels, this is like that one moment where he's like literally monologuing, right? The monologue. But it pertains to things that are going on in a very untheatrical kind of way. It's depicting them in just a bleak, realistic manner. And it's like, yeah, somebody's got to chew the scenery. But this is like the exception of the show in terms of like people generally aren't talking like this more often than not. Like you have Karn, I think his name is, the middle management kind of guy who's sort of Cassian's foil. And Karn is someone who is trying to make speeches like that, but he just doesn't really have it in him. And then we have this one dude behind the shadows of the Empire and the nascent rebellion who gives the speech of the show, really. And in episode 10, no less. It's not even the penultimate episode, let alone the finale.
Now, the ego that started this fight will never have a mirror or an audience or the light of gratitude. So what do I sacrifice? Everything!
He's also telling it to someone, like, the audience is very particular. Like, this is a private exchange between two people who, under normal circumstances, would never talk. And they're unmasked before each other. He's unmasked because normally he works for the Empire, and Axis is unmasked too, and the two of them can have sort of a frank conversation as equals, more or less. Not like equals in terms of power, but just in terms of like what they can convey to each other. It also doesn't bode well for him because he's telling him things that, well, I guess he's not telling him anything that might compromise the operation, but even so, I feel like this guy is kind of expendable and he just doesn't know it.
Just stay with me, Lonnie. I need all the heroes I can get.
So his idea of heroes and even choice is very, very different, you know, where he's a manipulator, he's someone who lies, but is also kind of frank at the same time, mixing lies with truth. You know, he is treacherous, and he's dressed in black for a reason. Like, this is a very deliberate wardrobe choice. In any event, I just wanted to show this because this entire sort of mentality overshadows the riot scene, where at the end of after giving his speech, where he's sort of shook by the events in a way that leads him to hesitate when he has Cass in his grip, and he's really sort of ready to, all right, well, you talk the talk, old man. Time to put your money where your mouth is. And yeah, I absolutely love that, though. See how I'm like referring to earlier parts in Andor and thinking about it relative to what's happening during the finale. Whereas with Obi-Wan, it's like, I don't care. Excuse me. I don't care what happened at the end of the show. I don't care what happened in the middle of the show. It's just, all right, here's the obligatory sword fight. Here's all of this stuff that's just being trotted out in front of us for the express purpose of making money. Whereas something like this, something like Andor, is much more costly to make. It takes a lot more time, a lot more work, a lot more effort. They're obviously not concerned with making money because they're making a show whose open, explicit message is fighting capitalism in a way that can be much more easily attributed to the United States. Like, those stormtroopers and their conduct and their weapons, like, this is a riot that you might see on the streets of the United States. In the United States, the conflict tends to be it's more racialized, structurally speaking, so they would be targeting certain people. But if you stand arm in arm with those who are the underclass, you get treated like the underclass. And that's something I don't think that Andor is really trying to say. It's much more of a collective effort, so it's not trying to comment on things quite that narrowly within a domestic American lens. It's much more about like just what happens under fascism and how workers are mistreated by those in power, those who stole power, who achieved formal power through lies and deception and bad faith rhetoric, and ultimately force and violence. And the way that they used that to basically get what they want, whereas, the people who are rioting and sort of fighting back against people like this, and he takes that brick and sort of clocks one of the stormtroopers in the head with it, they're doing violence because they are reacting to a cycle of abuse by those in power. The context is totally different. And in any event, so that sort of is going to wrap up the video, I think. I had a lot more to say critically or materially about why Andor is successful as far as like a dialectically, materially critical sort of critique of fascism, as opposed to something like Obi-Wan Kenobi, where it's just like, okay, it's the same sword fight that we've seen over and over, and it's just another fencing match between good versus evil that doesn't really try and say anything actively. Like, you can attach meaning to it, but by and large, it's just supposed to be a moneymaker for giant corporations. It feels empty. And happening relative to parallel engagements domestically and on foreign lands through abuses of corporate and state power, it just rings kind of hollow. Or something like Andor, it's like, take up the cry, take up the message. So I can't imagine Disney letting something like this, like, they're kind of trapped, right? Because this is a show that everyone's recognizing, and it's a planned thing that they talked about, and as long as it makes money, they'll let it continue. But at what point, how far can they take this before it starts to meet resistance? Before those in power start to respond negatively towards it, be those public intellectuals, be those corporations, be those elected officials. Because this is antithetical, not just to fascism, but to capitalism. This is collective worker action, because fascism historically stems from capitalism, from neoliberalism, from these romantic kinds of veneers or veils, the likes of which Disney has put out for years, one after another. In any event, so that's sort of the analysis between Obi-Wan and the analysis of Andor, the finale of both. And if you guys like this kind of content, it is unscripted, and I'm still finding my groove with this kind of thing. But if you like it, let me know. Like, share, and subscribe. If you don't like it, leave a comment, as long as it's constructive. If you leave something else and you say this sucks, or who is this person, and why do they make these really, really long videos, that what's the point, nerd? And that kind of stuff isn't really going to dissuade me from making the content that I've made for years and want to continue to make. So if you say it, I'll just mute it, delete it, whatever. I don't care. And but I do appreciate feedback. If there's something you want me to talk about, let me know. That can be about music, about Star Wars, about dialectical materialism. I do have a series coming up where I want to read my book. You can find it on my blog. It's about sexuality, and in terms of sex positivity and sex coercion relative to basically canonical depictions of sexuality in mainstream media versus iconoclastic variants. Sounds kind of nerdy, but that's the book that I'm writing about, and it does concern itself with genocide, with fascism, with neoliberalism. It's not connected directly with Star Wars, but it does use similar forms of analysis, similar terminology. Obviously, talking more about like queer theory, gender theory, addressing sexism, racism, various forms of abuse under capitalism, that kind of thing. It's all very intersectional from the point of view of a trans woman, me. So look forward to that if it's something that you're interested in. But otherwise, yeah, just give me feedback. And until next time, everyone, thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you later.